Before you overthink, imagine this. For the next 30 seconds, 4 houses stand in front of you, silent, waiting, and without knowing why. One of them pulls you in stronger than the others. Not because of logic, not because of beauty, but because something inside you recognizes it. And Carl Jung warned us about this moment, because the house you choose is not random. It is a mirror of your unconscious, a confession your mind makes when your mouth stays quiet. So don't choose the smartest house. Don't choose the safest house. Choose the one you feel drawn to instantly, because that feeling is your inner world speaking before your ego interferes. And by the end of this test, you may understand things about yourself you've been running from 4 years. Now imagine the houses clearly. House 1 is isolated deep in the forest, surrounded by tall trees and silence. No neighbors, no noise, just nature watching you. House 2 is a bright modern home in a lively city. Glass walls, open spaces, movement everywhere. House 3 is an old traditional house. Warm lights, wooden doors, history in its walls. It feels familiar even if you've never been there. And House 4 stands alone on a cliff by the ocean. Powerful winds, endless horizon. Beauty mixed with danger. Now don't analyze yet. Simply notice which house made your chest feel calm, curious, excited, or uneasy. Because Jung believed the unconscious speaks in symbols, not words. And this house is a symbol of how you relate to life, love, fear, and yourself. If you were drawn to the forest house, it reveals a psyche that seeks depth over noise. You are someone whose inner world is far richer than your outer expression. You may appear calm, distant, or even mysterious to others, but inside you exists an intense emotional landscape. You recharge in solitude because your mind is constantly processing meaning, patterns, and unspoken truths. And Jung would say, this is the mark of an introverted intuitive soul. Someone who feels exhausted by superficial connections, yet longs for profound understanding. You don't fear being alone, you fear being misunderstood. And many people like this learned early in life that safety comes from retreat, not because they were weak, but because they were sensitive. And sensitivity in a loud world often feels like a burden. If instead the city house called you, your inner world thrives on stimulation, exchange, and reflection through others. You discover who you are by interacting, debating, moving, evolving. And Jung would describe this as an extroverted psychological orientation, but not shallow as people assume. Rather, your energy flows outward because you trust life. You trust experience, and deep down you fear stagnation more than failure. Silence feels uncomfortable to you, not because you are empty, but because silence forces you to confront parts of yourself you usually process through action. You are growth-driven, future-focused, and often restless. Yet this restlessness is your soul demanding expansion. Those who feel drawn to the old traditional house often carry a deep connection to memory, roots, and emotional continuity. Your inner world is built on loyalty, meaning, and values that don't change easily. You may struggle in modern fast-moving environments because your psyche seeks stability and emotional truth rather than novelty. Jung would say your unconscious is strongly tied to the past, not as nostalgia, but as identity. You are someone who feels responsible for others, sometimes too responsible, and you often suppress your own needs to maintain harmony, which is why this house feels safe. It reflects your desire for belonging and emotional permanence. And finally, if the cliffside ocean house captured you, your inner world is driven by intensity, freedom, and confrontation with the unknown. You are not afraid of emotional depth, chaos, or transformation. In fact, you are drawn to it. Jung would associate this with a powerful individuation drive, meaning your soul refuses to live a small or ordinary life. You crave meaning even if it costs comfort. And many people like you feel torn between peace and passion, stability and adventure, because deep inside you know you are meant to become something more than what society expects. And this choice often belongs to people who have faced inner storms early in life and survived by becoming strong rather than safe. But here's what most people don't realize. The house you chose also reveals your shadow, the part of you you avoid. And Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Which means your house is not just who you are, it's also what you are becoming. And in the next part, we will uncover what your chosen house says about your hidden fears, emotional wounds, and the unconscious patterns shaping your relationships, motivation, and self-sabotage. And this is where the test becomes uncomfortable. because self-knowledge always is asterisk. Now that you've felt the pull of your chosen house, this is where Carl Jung would slow everything down, because the second layer of any symbol is not what it gives you, but what it protects you from seeing, and every house, no matter how beautiful or safe it feels, hides a psychological defense, a coping strategy your mind learned long before you were aware of it. Asterisk. So, if you chose the forest house, your solitude is not only a source of strength, it is also a shield. You retreat into your inner world to avoid emotional overwhelm, conflict, and disappointment, and while this gives you depth and clarity, it can also isolate you from opportunities for connection that could actually nourish you. Jung would say, your shadow shows up as emotional withdrawal, unspoken needs, and the habit of convincing yourself that independence means not needing anyone, when in truth, your soul still longs to be seen, understood, and emotionally met. But vulnerability feels risky because you learned early that expressing too much led to misunderstanding or emotional chaos. So you learned to become self-sufficient, wise, and inward. Yet the danger is mistaking safety for fulfillment. If you chose the city house, your shadow hides behind movement and productivity. You stay busy not just because you love life, but because stillness brings discomfort, introspection feels heavy, and you may fear what you'll discover if everything stops. Jung would say, your unconscious compensates for this by creating anxiety, restlessness, or the constant urge to improve, achieve, or prove. Relationships may feel exciting at first, but frustrating when they slow down, because intimacy requires presence, not performance, and your challenge is learning that depth is not found in speed, but in staying, feeling, and allowing silence to speak. Those drawn to the traditional house often carry the shadow of self. You define yourself by responsibility, loyalty, and emotional endurance, but deep down you may resent how much you give and how little you receive. Jung believed this creates a quiet inner tension, where the psyche splits between who you are for others and who you secretly wish you could be. You may feel guilty for wanting more freedom, pleasure, or change, because your identity is tied to being dependable. Yet the unconscious does not forget unmet needs, and when ignored long enough, they appear as emotional exhaustion, quiet sadness, or sudden urges to escape. And if the cliffside house chose you, your shadow lies in emotional extremes. You live intensely, love deeply, and feel strongly, but stability may feel boring or suffocating. Jung would say your psyche oscillates between longing for peace and craving chaos, and this can create cycles of self-sabotage where you destroy what is good simply because it feels too safe. You may unconsciously test life, relationships, and yourself just to feel alive, because your identity is built around transformation, not comfort. Yet the shadow warns that constant intensity can burn you out before you reach wholeness. And here is where Jung's concept of individuation becomes critical, because the goal is not to abandon your house, but to integrate its opposite. The forest soul must learn to risk connection. The city soul must learn to sit with silence. The traditional soul must honor personal desire, and the cliff soul must learn that peace does not equal stagnation. This balance is what Jung called psychological maturity, the moment when the ego stops running the show and the self takes the lead. And most people never reach this point because it requires facing discomfort consciously rather than escaping it unconsciously. And in the final part, we will uncover how your house choice shapes your love patterns, decision-making, and life direction, and how to consciously use this insight to stop repeating the same emotional loops. You don't even realize you're trapped in asterisk now. We arrive at the most revealing layer of this test, the part Carl Jung cared about most, because understanding a symbol is meaningless unless it changes how you live, love, and choose. So let's look at how your house shapes your relationships, your decisions, and the direction of your life without you even noticing it. Because the unconscious does not ask for permission. It quietly repeats patterns until awareness interrupts them. If the forest house was yours, you love in a way that is deep, loyal, and selective. You don't fall easily, but when you do, you attach strongly, often idealizing the person you let into your inner world. Jung would say your danger is projection, meaning you may project your inner depth, sensitivity, and emotional intelligence onto others, assuming they understand you the way you understand yourself, and when they don't, disappointment hits hard and silently. You may then retreat rather than communicate, reinforcing the belief that closeness leads to pain. And this pattern can follow you not only in love, but in friendships and career choices, where you choose environments that allow solitude over visibility, meaning over recognition. Yet your growth begins when you realize that being seen does not automatically mean being harmed, and that expressing needs does not make you weak, it makes you whole. If the city house spoke to you, your relationships often begin with excitement, chemistry, and mental stimulation. You are attracted to people who reflect your energy, ambition, and forward momentum. But Jung would notice that when emotional depth is required, you may feel restless or confined, unconsciously seeking novelty instead of intimacy. And this can create cycles where relationships feel intense but short, not because you can't commit, but because commitment asks you to slow down and feel. And your life decisions often follow a similar pattern. You chase growth, opportunity, and expansion, sometimes at the cost of emotional grounding. And your transformation happens when you learn that stillness is not regression, it is integration, and that staying with one thing long enough allows your soul to catch up with your speed. For those who chose the traditional house, love is duty, loyalty, and emotional consistency. You stay even when it hurts. You forgive even when it drains you. And Jung would say, your unconscious belief is that love must be earned through sacrifice, which often leads you to attract people who take more than they give, because your psyche is comfortable in the role of the giver, the stabilizer, the emotional anchor, and your life decisions reflect this. You choose safety over desire, familiarity over passion, and responsibility over curiosity. Yet the unconscious rebels when ignored, and this rebellion may appear later in life as sudden dissatisfaction, quiet depression, or a longing you can't name. And your individuation begins the moment you allow yourself to want without guilt, to choose without explaining, and to understand that love does not require self. And if the cliffside ocean house was yours, your relationships are transformative, intense, and often karmic. You don't do casual connection. You dive straight into depth, passion, and emotional truth. Jung would say, you are drawn to partners who awaken you, challenge you, or even destabilize you, because your psyche equates love with transformation. And while this gives you profound emotional experiences, it can also lead to cycles of drama, breakage, and rebuilding. Your life choices often mirror this pattern. Bold risks, sudden changes, powerful and your shadow appears when you mistake chaos for destiny, believing that peace means settling, when in fact, true individuation for you lies in learning that stability can be expansive too. That calm does not erase passion, it sustains it. And here is the final truth Jung would leave you with. No house is better than the other, because each represents a stage of consciousness, a way the psyche learned to survive, adapt, and make sense of the world. But your task is not to live inside the house forever. It is to understand it, integrate its lessons, and step beyond its limitations. Because the moment you become aware of why you choose what you choose, you stop being controlled by it. And this is what Jung meant when he said that enlightenment is not imagining figures of light, but making the darkness conscious. So ask yourself now, not which house you chose, but what part of yourself that house has been protecting, hiding, or expressing all along. Because when you see that clearly, you don't just pass the test. You begin the journey toward becoming who you were always meant to be.